All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Always appreciated. Glad we're able to get to a quorum. So we have quite a bit on the agenda tonight. Hopefully everyone got the meeting packet and has had a chance to look through it and look at the meeting minutes from the last conversation we had. So just as a reminder, our next meeting date is May 19th. The one after that will be June 16th. If anyone has any challenges with that, let us know, but we'll assume that it works unless we hear otherwise. So just want to go through the last month's meeting minutes and see if we can get approval for that. They looked good to me. Thank you, Ruthie, for taking notes. I know there's a lot of content that we went through. So they look good to me. Does we have any comments or questions from anyone on the meeting minutes from the March 17th meeting?
I'll propose a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Warren.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. We will now vote to officially approve the meeting minutes from the March meeting. Can everyone just raise their hands? Members of the committee, all in favor? Great.
Aye.
That is unanimous for those who are present. Great, so those are approved. Thank you. So I don't actually have a specific update today. You know, we're going to be covering a number of items. We had a meeting last night, the town hearing for Article 31, which I believe, Kate, you're going to probably touch on, so I won't go through that. But it was Kate did an awesome job of pulling together a presentation about that, and so we can cover that. And then we're going to kind of revisit. We're going to go through in detail that topic. I don't believe Alice is going to be here, but Kate will cover that. And then we'll revisit home energy scores, the topic that I had kind of not breezed through, but had to quickly go through last time, so we can have some more discussion. And then somewhat related to that, we'll talk about commercial building disclosures, and hopefully John, there he is. John will be talking through and has good background on that topic. So that'll be interesting. I think, you know, somewhat related to home energy scores. So kind of interesting to have those two topics together. So I don't have anything else that comes to mind for my update. So I'm just going to pass it over to Kate now for her update.
Sure, thanks, Jake. So I put a few things in your packet in terms of my update. One of the things is that I've mentioned before, CSEC is working on a bunch of case studies about electric homes, which I think will be really helpful in supporting our efforts to transition existing homes off of fossil fuels to heat pumps. So they have a list of a lot of residents that have gone through that process and have been interviewing them and writing up case studies. And I think in the end, we'll have at least a dozen of them, a whole range of different situations of, you know, new construction with heat pumps from the beginning to transitioning off of oil to heat pumps, gas to heat pumps, home, partial home, different motivations, different ages of homes, sizes and the like. So I think that will be a really good kind of set of collateral and content for us in the heat pump promotion. So I'm helping kind of pull those together in their final stages. CSEC's doing a really great job of doing all the interviews and writing them up. So there's 2 that are done on the website right now, if you want to check them out. They're on the heat pump part of the website, but I'll keep you posted as more of those get rolled out. A couple other things going on. The we have an RFP out right now for a fleet electrification study. So this was something that came up, originated with Brian Folds through a town meeting discussion last year. And the town, it was in our climate action plan as well to do a plan for how we're going to electrify the municipal fleet. So we have an RFP out right now for consultants to do that. And the proposals are due mid-May. So I expect the project will probably start sometime in the summer once we get the consultant on board to help us look at our vehicles and also our infrastructure needs so that we can be planning ahead for what are we going to need to charge a future fully electric fleet. So I'm excited that that's getting started in the next few months. So I'll keep you posted as that rolls out. And the last thing is the library sustainability planning efforts that you all provided input on. I've been keeping you up to date on. It's wrapping up. The draft plan is out for community feedback. They've been doing a really good job with that. So I'm really excited to see that come together. And there's a community event next Monday, the 3rd, for folks to learn more about the draft plan and ask questions, make comments, but you can also review the plan online and make comments that way too. So that's coming down the line next week, and the plan will probably be wrapped up over the next, I think, month or so after that. So that's it for me on those topics. And like Jake said, if you have any questions about that, happy to answer them. And if not, we can talk about Article 31.
Any questions for Kate on her update? Okay. We will jump right into Article 31.
All
Kate, you want
right.
to kick us off, and then I can also chime in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So Article 31 is the article number for the fossil fuel article that CAB, you all recommended to the select board based on what was going to be Article 40 last year. I won't go into the whole story because you all know it very well, but it's on the warrant for town meeting and it's Article 31. So last night was the public hearing for the select board articles. So Jake and I presented that article, and the public hearings are really kind of the most in-depth presentation that the town gets on the town meeting articles, and also an opportunity to get feedback and answer questions and figure out what questions are still out there about the article. So we gave a presentation, went through kind of the history of why we're doing this, why this is so important to our climate efforts, and what the article entails. There are a number of questions about it, some about the exemptions in the article. There's exemptions in there for affordable housing and generators. So there's some questions about why those were in there, and some thoughts about maybe changing that. There were questions about CMLP and whether they'll be able to handle the additional electrical load from more electrification of homes. There is a question about, there's an exemption in there around hot water heating for large buildings. There's a little confusion about what exactly that was exempting and why. There was a question, there are a number of questions and comments about the power supply and whether electrification is really a way to decarbonize. Question about, will we risk a lawsuit from the fossil fuel industry, and will having fewer gas lines impact whether National Grid will fix the gas leaks that we have in town? So those are the ones that I noted down that I think are good for us to think about in our communications about the article going forward. But really the next steps are that town meeting's June 13th, but between now and then, Alice is really interested in spreading the word to other committees. And so I've put together with Alice a kind of standard stock presentation with talking points in it so that anybody can present to a committee in less than 10 minutes. Here's what the article is and why it's important. So if you are interested in helping with that, that would be really great. And Alice, I think, will be coordinating kind of who's going where. So if anyone's up for doing a presentation or two, we've tried to make it as easy as possible. There's also a bunch of FAQs. So if people ask questions, you can refer to that. It'd be pretty straightforward. So would love help in kind of doing that road show over the next couple of months. So if you're up for it, send a note to Alice. She's traveling at the moment, so if you don't hear back right away, I'm sure she'll get back to you. And I think that's it for next steps. Jake, do you want to share any other kind of reflections or insights on last night? And I see Jane, you're on too, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was gonna offer some stuff, but Jake, why don't you go? You're the chair.
Okay, no, I mean, Jane, it would be great to hear your perspective as well. I mean, I think there were a lot of questions, there are a lot of good comments and questions, and I think some good pushback on the affordable housing exemption. And, we talked about the affordability of all electric, of the new air source heat pumps and all electric new construction versus kind of traditional construction. And so, that is an important question. And, Alice has been involved in a lot of these detailed conversations over, the past really couple of years. And I think had a good response in terms of some of the concerns from that affordable housing community and others in town that really led to that language being added. But I think it's an important point for us to consider. And I think there were also some, good comments about, well, we can electrify things, but is that really going to drive emissions reductions? And I think those are important points that a lot of those elements are explained in other areas, and I think were touched upon in the presentation, but I think there's opportunities just to strengthen and make sure we reinforce that this is one piece of a larger strategy for the town to help support our climate goals, and that they need to work together. So I think those were, I'm just looking at my notes here, but those were kind of some of my key takeaways from the conversation. I'm probably missing something, but Jane, why don't you chime in as well?
Thanks, Jake. And first of all, Kate, you did an amazing job, and I feel badly because initially I was going to be the co-presenter. For those who don't, this is my swan song on the select board, but for some who may not know, we're also in the process of closing on a house in Carlisle. And so there's some conversation about whether or not I will still be considered a Concord resident if our lease is valid here, but not our residency. I don't think it's climate activist, nor do I think it's issues with this warrant article that would become an issue. But my goal is not to hinder progress anywhere, any way at all. So that's why I was not as involved as I had hoped to be. So the feedback I've got is, there's the obvious pieces which come from, a not surprising group of people saying, well, I like my gas stove. Why would you be putting forth an overly zealous warrant article that basically says to anybody who wants to move into a new development in Concord, they can't have gas and they can't have a gas stove. Now, obviously there are ways to touch on that. And I don't think probably saying, well, induction stovetops are much better now. But, propane is, there are ways around it, but that was one of the knee-jerk responses that I got an earful on. I also, and I do think that we need to delve into this specifically, but I think the more data we can show about the kind of impact on the increase in non-carbon electric or non-carbon generation in NEPOOL over time is important, because I do think that we all know it's completely true that some piece of increased electric demand is going to pull from, and if Concord has a strong non-carbon requirement, then potentially all we're doing is shifting more carbon generation into somebody else's load versus guaranteeing that generation is taken off the system. Now, one of my fastest responses is the path to a non-carbon electric grid has a lot of different elements in it. And one of the absolutely most important elements is early models. Is Concord leading the way, as Concord has been known to do in many ways, in many different places. And sort of the value of the ability for the individual homeowner to put solar on their rooftop. Maybe that solar on the rooftop doesn't change the grid, but it attaches that homeowner and the people that they live with very, very clearly to climate and to clean energy. So it has an educational component, it has an ownership component, and it has a demonstration and this is long before it simply takes those, it changes that person's energy profile. So I don't, can Concord alone with a no new construction, no new gas for new construction, change the amount of fossil on NEPOOL? Probably not. But it's one of the towns that are in coalition making movement, and that's an important point. And I certainly hammered it home. The other, I think, critical piece, I don't remember whether it was Kate or Alice who made it last night, but is simply the infrastructure piece, which is, and this is what I've talked to Marcy Reed at National Grid about, which is these are stranded assets. So every time we lay an inch or an acre of new gas line, those are potentially stranded investments in or stranded assets in gas, and you're wedding the owner of those assets to the value, to earning from that investment over time. So if our goal is to stop, is to remove fossil from our energy mix, then we need to send the market signals that we don't want new infrastructure being built, and therefore the market being supported. I think that's a discussion that sometimes doesn't necessarily attach to. I think you have to think about this a little bit differently, or maybe have more depth in the system and in energy to appreciate that. But I found both of those arguments at least deflated some of the pushback I got. And I don't know that it's a fundamental. I don't know how large this faction or contingent is. I do think that Kate, one of the places to spend some time for you, for Jake, and for anybody else that's in support of Article 31 on CAB, is the League of Women Voters. I think that's both a voting block, a demographic block, and a conversational block that has concern. And I think that I think Alice handled the affordable housing exemption quite well. And ideally, I think, and maybe this is a nuance, ideally over time, affordable housing in fact, all new housing mix would choose electric in the first place. That, you know, that serves the demographic and the potential future homeowners. That's what they want. That's how they prefer it. And I also don't know whether anybody has spoken to either the real estate community or any of the developers in town. But I think having, you know, going in front of the, for instance, the Concord business group, I'm just spacing on their actual name, which is largely the commercial real estate community, and other commercial interests in town. But I think that's another group to reach out to, at the very least, to deflect any opposition that may or may not exist there. So that would be my 2 cents. It's probably way more than anybody cared to listen to.
That's helpful, Jane. And I know that Alice has engaged a lot of those folks already last year and has been having ongoing conversations. So I think a lot of that's already in the works, but it's good to get your take.
Well, it's amazing how quickly people forget that this was, you know, this was likely to sail through last year. People have been in their homes for a very long time since then. So I don't know whether that means the attachment to gas has changed. I hope not, but you know, or just fear in general has changed a bit.
And you know, and one of the things that I don't think we emphasized a lot last night, that maybe would be helpful in future conversations, are the health benefits to an all electric new construction. And that's a lot of the reason why a lot of affordable housing is going with all electric, in addition to the cost, comfort, and resilience benefits. So I think that's something that we could do better in communicating. And I also just think big picture to talk about this is, you know, this is a specific article on new construction because it's something we can tackle. And I think Jake referred to it as, you know, it's one tool in our climate toolbox. And there are a lot of other complex issues that we need to work on. And this is just one of them. And it's a step that we can take going forward. So talking about it as kind of a piece of the puzzle may be helpful.
Other comments or questions from anyone on CAB?
So Sven here. I
Sorry,
had a couple of questions.
Sorry, we're gonna hold public comments. We have a lot of content to go through, and we're gonna hold public comments until towards the end of the meeting, which is what we try and do. It just depends on the schedule. So I apologize, but I think we'll hold the public comments at this point. So I mean, Kate, I think you had reached out earlier and I can't remember if I replied, but I'm happy to help present and meet with, you know, different committees. I know there's probably an opportunity for me to reach out to a broader group of committees just to let them know that you know, this article's coming up at town meeting, and if they're interested in having a member of CAB, you know, basically present at one of their next meetings, that we can do that. I think their meetings are, you know, this is going to be during the May timeframe. So I'm happy to do that and reach out to the different committee chairs and see what level of interest we get.
That'd be great.
Okay. Okay, any other comments on the Article 31? Okay, I do see that we have some time looking at the schedule. So I think if there are public comments on Article 31, I know I'm backtracking, but I think it probably makes sense since we just were talking about it to allow those now. So Sven, if you'd like to chime in, and I see Brian, your hand is up as well. So why don't we go with Sven first? Thanks for your patience. I just want to make sure we were on schedule.
Yeah, no problem. I understand you have a lot on your plate. Again, I'm new to this. I recently moved from California to here, so I'm still adjusting to the way how these things are done here in Massachusetts. I think I generally agree this is an extremely important warrant. I think what in presenting the warrant needs to be worked out, and you might have the data, is really deal with some of the fear that is out there, inclusive me, is like, what does it mean to the local grid? Do we generate another Texas? I think perhaps some of the fear you hear against it is based on what people saw in a hard winter in Texas, where people suddenly pulled a lot of energy in a very short time frame, and things went south. And solar cells don't help. I have solar cells here. If there's snow on the solar cells, I don't produce a single kilowatt. So in these situations, I'm just pulling all the energy out of the grid. And I think you might have the answers. They should be shown. Just make it transparent and deal and help to get the fear away from the plate. The other one, I'm personally puzzled. I agree with heat pumps, but there's nothing there that prevents people from using a resistant-based electric heating. And that would be completely backfiring if people are not using heat pumps for electric heating, but resistant-based heating, and because that eats 3 times more energy and would be completely counterproductive. So there must be some kind of an angle there. Just talk about efficiency and making sure that efficient systems are installed, and not just because the electricity comes out the plug, I'm just taking whatever heating system I can buy cheap in Home Depot or somewhere else, and then eat up all the energy there, and even be in the end, if you do the climate balance there, the carbon dioxide balance, you're counterproductive here. So I understand the strategy is towards heat pump, and I completely support that, but nothing in this warrant is prioritizing heat pumps over and above resistant electricity heating. So these are some of the main things I think are important, and then transparency on cost. That is, if you're talking to people, make clear, make examples. This is what the cost is, and it's more or less, but be transparent. Somehow, I left the meeting yesterday, and I just want to give this as an open and honest feedback. I left the meeting yesterday, it was like, it was felt not 100% transparent, and that's not helpful in a crucial decision that is done here for the city, and it's the right direction. So you have to be as transparent as possible to help people to get their arms around. And that's all.
Thanks, Sven, for those comments. I think that, and I know you raised these as well last night, and I know we didn't touch upon, kind of specifically those comments in some of our recap, but I think the reliability concern is something that we should touch on. And I know in Texas, there was some misinformation about, the renewable energy and windmills and shutdowns there. And in fact, a lot of the issues were actually with the natural gas pipelines, is my understanding. And so from an from the electricity standpoint, it wasn't necessarily renewables driving it, but there were still major challenges there. So what do we need to address from a reliability concern, I think is a good point. I guess I don't know enough about this, but my expectation with resistance-based systems would be that, especially as we head towards this new net zero code, I think it would be very difficult for those types of systems to necessarily qualify, especially if they're trying to be used in like some sort of like new construction, whole home heating, like trying to install that. I just, not to mention the cost of doing that would be astronomical. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense for a builder or a homeowner to make that choice, but I'm not a builder. I don't have expertise necessarily. So I think it's potential that there may be that could come up. So it's something we may want to think about how to address. And a good, I think another good point on the transparency and costs. I think that's an area that we recognize, we can continue to share more and have more information to share for those who are interested. Any other thoughts from other folks or from Kate on that?
No, that's what I was thinking too. I mean, I would be surprised if a new building could comply with the stretch code with electric
Yeah, even the stretch
resistance
code, right.
heat. So while this article doesn't specifically, it's technology agnostic, I think that the only logical option would be heat pumps in new construction. But I think we can make sure that's covered in our FAQs.
Brian.
Yeah. So many of you know how many times, I mean, over the last decade of doing things in town for sustainability, we've known that buildings are the largest emitters, the largest sector of emitters. And we have struggled to find ways to change that, to really change the dynamic around buildings. And we worked, it boils down to, we can't do anything to adjust the state building code. We can't put in a bylaw that says you have to have more insulation in your home. We can't prescribe things like that. So this home rule petition was RMI's, design after looking at all of the ways that we could improve building performance in town. And it's a coordinated effort with other towns to get the state to change the code, get the state to move. And I think we kind of get stuck in the details on, what technology. As Kate put it, it's technology agnostic. It just says, electricity is preferred because it's the only fuel that we can decarbonize. We can't, when someone puts in a propane heating system or a natural gas heating system, it's going to have the same level of emissions day one as it does at the end of life. Whereas the electricity that's supplied to a heat pump can change its emission profile over time. And it's not perfect, but we can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And I wrote up a few notes that I shared with Kate and Jake from the meeting, and hopefully we can answer people's questions without getting so in the weeds that we create arguments that are over, the math versus the principle. So that's my concern. I want us to stay higher level on this. And Sven, there is a massive number of reports and the climate action plan and tons of data accumulated by the town through these efforts. So if you have questions, you can send them to Kate or to myself, and we'll direct you to the document that shows how we came about this path. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Other comments from Cab? Pamela, I see you have your hand up. Go
Hi,
ahead. Hi.
Pamela, 13 Concord Green. I think it's not easy to find the right information. Specifically examples of how these things are beneficial, sort of decarbonize through electricity 101 information, particularly about the cheapness of building better, more healthy, and all electric. And is there some way we could get, you mentioned a frequently asked questions. Can we get that in the packet or more widespread?
Yeah, Pamela, it's in the works as part of the outreach for the article. So there's still being some edits, but we'll make that available.
I thought your comments were really good. It's just that, for examples like Brian's house, the League of Women Voters had a house tour, a greenhouse tour several years ago, which was just illuminating in the information that was possible, that was already done in this town. But that knowledge isn't out there. There's still the backwards idea that doing it this way is more expensive instead of less expensive and cleaner and healthier and zero externalized costs on the world and everybody else from fossil fuel use.
Well, I think that's the great opportunity with this article is the educational component and opportunity that we have to basically talk to that, to educate the community about it, and also, to educate them about everything else that's going on. So I think, if nothing else, if somehow this doesn't pass,
Oh
and
gosh,
hopefully that won't be the case, we'll hopefully have educated a lot more folks about the feasibility of the technology, all of the incentives that we have in town, all the opportunities for other elements that they can take, other actions they can take in their home. So that's going to be a huge benefit of this regardless of the outcome.
where's the website? Is there somewhere we can send links for interesting articles that people could read and things like that?
I mean, there's a lot of information about heat pumps on the town's website, but that's mostly specific to town rebates and the like.
About this article, though, all of the benefits that this article,
I think Mothers Out Front might be setting something up more related to the vote itself, but I'm not involved in that. The town website has the slides from last night's public hearing. The recording will be up there, and any of the handouts that are associated with town meeting will go on the town's website.
okay, thanks.
John, go ahead. Sorry, John, you're on mute. Uh-oh. Can't hear you. You're not on mute, but we can't hear you. That will pose challenges later when you're presenting, but hopefully you can, you'll be able to work through that. Maybe worst case scenario, John can call, like he can call in if needed, to just be audio. I know we try to avoid that, but if that's what we need to do. So yeah, if you are able to get audio back, John, let us know, and keep trying to ping and speak up. So if we hear you, we can talk through what question you had. Or you could chat it through, but it's not going to really help with dialogue. So, okay, any other comments before we move on? Our next agenda item was on home energy scores. Okay. So, so I know Kate included the presentation that I went through the last time. In our last meeting, we didn't have a lot of time for it, so we wanted to carve out some time for dialogue, questions, any additional thoughts that people had, if you were able to kind of dig into it a little bit more in the meantime. I guess the only thing that a couple things that I just want to emphasize in terms of my perspective. I think that there's a lot of different things that we could try that leverage this home energy score idea and this concept and the tools and resources that DOE has developed to support it. And I think from my perspective, one of the important elements is just getting away from just having people who are proactively focused on efficiency and reaching out to, the light plan or mass save or others to get, an audit done and taking action on that, and broadening this to give people visibility to a better understanding of, like, what am I using for energy in my home? How does that compare to other homes? How does this translate into carbon? And starting to hopefully get more people who maybe haven't thought about this to focus on it and start taking advantage of some of the programs and incentives that we have in place. And hopefully this can help inform future incentives. And I think what the example of Portland, Oregon that I shared, they had a voluntary program that, was pretty rigorous, that they had been running for years. And I think they had like 5% of their total home base who had taken advantage of it over, 5 or 6 or so years. I don't have the exact figures. It's in the deck, but when they moved to a home energy score, and again, it was a mandatory program for them, but I think we're in a unique position with the light plant and the communication opportunities there. So it doesn't have to be mandatory. But when they moved to, providing this information and requiring this information, they just got a significant increase in engagement and action on efficiency. And I think the pilot that Massachusetts did, where they basically did a mass save audit and they added this scorecard to it as another visual in addition to the to the actual audit. They had a 25% increase in engagement and adoption of actual action. So it had benefits just having that additional visual and the comparison and benchmarking. So I think there's value, and I think the big question is what structure might work best for the town, given the constraints we have, given the opportunity we have with the light plant, and what are the different elements that we could potentially pursue, and then how to do that and what groups need to be involved. So again, I think there's an opportunity from an educational standpoint to really get people focused on taking action on efficiency and getting to that next step of an audit. So that's why I kind of like the idea of almost having like the light plant providing some sort of modeled score that then could be refined and validated through an audit if someone were to take that. Because then you could really potentially you could send this out with a, you know, on a annual basis with a bill or through an email. But we're missing data. So there's gaps, there's challenges with national grid data, there's challenges with fuel oil. And, you know, not to mention it doesn't cover transportation. So anyway, I'll stop there, but those are just some of my thoughts as I was looking into it and researching it. But I'll open it up to any other questions, thoughts, comments. Warren.
Warren, I'd like to make a comment and make a suggestion. My comment is we should not be looking at this only or even primarily as a climate change issue. This is a consumer protection issue. There is no bigger purchase that a person makes than the purchase of a home. And by not doing a home energy score, we're telling people that they should make that purchase without all the best information that would allow them to make a sound consumer decision. So that's my comment. My suggestion, the organization behind the Portland program, Energy Trust of Oregon, is one of the members of my organization, Clean Energy States Alliance. And in fact, our board chair is from Energy Trust of Oregon. If you wanted, I'd be happy to arrange for somebody from there to meet at a future meeting to talk about their experience and what they've learned from that and what suggestions they'd have for us.
I love that suggestion. Thank you. I think that would be great. Kate, do you agree?
Unless somebody disagrees, I'll reach out to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've done a good job of documenting it, but it's never as good as getting to actually hear it directly from the source. And it'd be great to hear their thoughts on how what they learned could apply to Concord, given our, nuances. That'd be great.
Okay, I'll reach out to them.
Thanks, Warren.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that even though we're so different than Portland in so many ways, both, climate and size and structure, I think that the housing stock represents a similar percentage of their overall built environment carbon footprint as ours does. So there's similarities, at least there. So yeah, thank you, Warren, for that. That would be terrific. Other thoughts? Courtney?
More questions?
Yep.
That's okay.
Sure, of course.
So the HES, is that something, I'm just seeing this slide, I don't know, 6 in the slide deck, I guess, that there's all these different energy audit rating systems. Was that home energy score, is that something that Portland developed, or is that a national system? I just confess I don't know.
Yep. So it's a national framework and methodology that the DOE developed, but that's basically there's an engine that they have that ties into a lot of other data systems. And the communities that are using it, they can customize how the information, like how they present the information. So they have kind of their standard report that they've developed, but a lot of the communities and some of the utilities, I don't have examples from everyone who's using it, but there's a lot of flexibility to customize it. And so I provided, I think, an example from Massachusetts and an example from Portland, just to illustrate, how you can present the information. I believe the Massachusetts example, I don't know if they used, my understanding is MassSave is engaged with this. I don't know to what extent they've tapped into this, you know, the methodology and the actual the system to generate the home energy scores that's used. But slide 6 is really about how does this differ from other evaluations of home energy use, and like how granular are they? So I think a comprehensive energy audit that's all the way to the right there would be, you know, would also look at the electric load and actual usage and sort of bring that together. So you can address like plug load and everything else. Whereas this is very focused on like, what's the equipment, what's the insulation, windows, like all of those core things that really drive a lot of the impact. But, you know, the behavioral elements also, and what choices you make in appliances and everything else obviously have an impact too. So that's what this was trying to kind of communicate.
Okay. And then did Portland do it only at time of sale, or were they doing it on a more regular?
It's just at time of sale. So I guess there's about 10 to 12,000 homes in, I think there's like 600,000 or something. I can't remember the specific stat, but sorry, not 600,000. There's 160,000. No, yeah, there. Where is it? So it's 10 to 12,000 homes they expect that go on the market every year that would actually have to go through this process, unless they you know, received one, kind of voluntarily got one. You know, I think it's within a couple of years. And I think there's 160,000 homes total.
Okay. So, I guess general thoughts is just, I could see benefit, as Warren talked about, to consumers, you know, making the trade, you know, when they're buying and selling, to understand kind of what they're getting. But then I can also see from a, you know, once you're in the home, from a behavior standpoint, though I know we get a little bit of information on our standard CMLP bill, maybe making that a bit more robust or more climate focused. So I could see opportunity maybe for both, but then, you know, I'm concerned about the load on whoever has to do that, you know, and is that, you know, who would take on such a system? What department would that fall under, and do we have the capacity to manage it? But I could see benefit, and, you know, maybe benefit to kind of both time of sale and regular updates, whether it's, you know, probably annual would be a reasonable time frame for residents who are already in their homes, and you know, as a bringing it back to the top of mind reminder. Oh yeah, you know, this is sort of what your energy use looked like, and this was the impact to carbon footprint, to the town's carbon footprint. You know how that all looks on the actual bill, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the light plant, it really makes sense for them to take a large role in this, because this also ties into, you know, but there's another group that Jan from the light plan and Brad and Kate and a few others are involved in, that's looking at, you know, what approach can we take to get oil heat homes to transition directly to electric? And, you know, a lot of this is, there's similar data gaps, and, you know, trying to understand how can we reach out to those folks, how do we educate them? But the light plan, I mean, that's ultimately where we need to go. We need a strategy around how do you target different people? What are the right incentives to get them to, when their equipment is reaching the end of life, like, how do we know that? When is the best time to engage? Who are the, like, where is the opportunity where you should actually spend your time and not waste, effort and money on someone who just installed a new system, that there's no way they're going to transition. So I think this whole move to electrification, move away from, how do you get someone who is near the end of life of whatever system they have to not choose the natural gas system, to just replace it, to not choose another oil boiler. And I think that's where we are going to make improvements, not to mention just energy efficiency upgrades and all of those elements. So I think for the light plan to have visibility, more visibility into all of the homes that are using these different fuels, to be able to provide some more information back to residents about the impact of their home and the infrastructure they have, both from a cost perspective, benchmarking perspective, and the carbon impact, could help that transition, hopefully. And they could use that data in other ways to help with their outreach on electrification potentially. So I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity, but you're right. It's how is that best organized? Does the light plan have the resources to even pursue it? I think the fact that DOE has this model could help with, you don't have to have the expertise to model it. You literally just need those baseline elements. And it could just be part of an audit program, and it could just be supplementary to an existing audit program. And it sounds like Mass Save is moving in that direction. So the other auditing program that the light plant works with, this could be something they offer as well. But I just don't think it's going to touch as many people as we need. It's not going to move as fast as we need it to move.
Jake, a question that I should know. In Portland, it was mandatory for at the time of sale. But how do the assessors who are assessing the homes get the data? Do they get that directly from the homeowner, or do they get that from the utility?
So basically there's you schedule the audit, and they go and they walk through, and they basically do a site visit and get all the information. I'm sure some of that information they capture from, the existing real estate systems or other systems, but they're validating like, oh, okay, they still have this. It's still this structure. They haven't had any renovations, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a, on-site, but it's pretty inexpensive. It's like I think it was like $120 on average. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just thinking through, like, if, we can't get data, National Grid won't give us customer specific data for privacy reasons, but they do, but I wonder if they would give it to a third party. And if, a third party could combine CMLP data with other data and do the score, where if that might be an option, but I'm not sure if that's something that they would even do, but I was just thinking through.
Yeah, I'd asked Michael about that to see if he could talk to some of his connections. And I think it would need to be a dialogue to figure out in what capacity in what situation would National Grid be willing to share address level residential natural gas use with the town for use for this program. And I think it would be a shame to have to try and pass a bylaw to require them to do it, given they have it. But maybe there needs to be if they get a sign off from whatever resident that they're okay with it being shared with this party. I don't know. I think that would need to be explored, but it could be a quick win if we're able to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, and I just was on a webinar this week, and I haven't dug into it, but they were sharing that a lot of there's a lot more Mass Save data available through maps, and they were pitching it as like the most location specific they've ever given out Mass Save data. So it's like by census tract, you can see uptake in rebate programs and that kind of stuff. I can spend some more time with that. I don't know if anyone else has dug into that to see, it's not address level specific, but it seems to be a little bit better than what we've had in the past.
Well, and maybe Mass Save. I know you've had struggled to get even information on people who've had an audit, right? A Mass Save audit, they won't share that either. So,
Right.
but maybe if, given that my understanding is they're moving in this direction of adopting some sort of score as part of their auditing, maybe, I don't know, maybe working through them might be an option as well, where National Grid would agree. I don't know, but I think it's worth pursuing some more to try and dig into that and see, what could get access to. I mean, fuel oil is its own challenge, but
John's got his hand up. Maybe his audio is working.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I connected with my iPad, so. Well, I'll actually touch on it when I talk about the benchmarking ordinances, but there's a similar issue with utility data and their privacy thresholds, which are actually fairly low. And I don't have experience with National Grid, but with Eversource, there's a authorization form when you're below the privacy threshold. So it seems to me there should be a way where if the requirement is on the owner and the utility has can get an authorization from the owner, that there's a way for the data to get through.
so we'd almost have to require residents to share that information with the light plant or whoever, and then National Grid would be like, oh, okay, you have to get this, so here's the authorization form, and they'll share it, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, if you were gonna, I mean, you'd have to pass some kind of bylaw, right? That says, I assume. I mean, how else are you going to do a time of sale requirement? So in that case, you're going to have to put the requirement on someone, which would, I think, have to be the owner. And so they're going to have to get you the data one way or another. And if National Grid is reluctant to provide the data to the town, they usually, I think, not concerned as long as the customer is authorizing it. So there just has to be a procedure for that. So I think there's a workaround for that kind of thing. But I mean, my question is really, how would we set this up to be, run as a town program? And so it'd be useful to kind of work through some of those details.
I guess I was thinking that the other option is, it's not required at time of sale, but if we can get access to the information, then it's just the light plant could simply leverage it to provide visibility and do some. It wouldn't be like it wouldn't be an audit-based approach, and you'd need to get some more information. But we have a lot of information about the homes in town from the public records, so it's kind of leveraging all that information.
Yeah.
And then you could actually have residents sort of go in and provide updates on, oh no, like this isn't accurate, which would help in other ways for climate work on homes potentially. So
I mean, you'd have to talk to National Grid, and that would be an elegant way to do it. My sense is the utilities are pretty reluctant to divulge account data that relates to an individual or individual household.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like a lot of this just kind of reinforces how, I don't know how much we may stand to learn from Warren, your connections in Oregon, and the process that they went through. I'm sure similar questions and roadblocks were present for them as well. Although I don't know enough details about that particular program and how different that is from what we're talking about here. But I would just add my own support for bringing somebody in who's been through this process. I think that'll help to enlighten us a bit further.
All right, well, thanks for the feedback. And I think, so action items coming out of this were, Warren, thanks for following up Energy Trust of Oregon contact and seeing if we can have a follow-up conversation with them. You know, Kate and I will, as part of this other group that been kind of participating, just started participating in, kind of, and continue to explore this and keep digging to see if there's potentially some opportunities and what that would look like in terms of access of data from National Grid. But let's keep moving. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but not super ahead of schedule. Want to make sure John has plenty of time to talk about commercial building ordinances. So John, if you are ready, I'll hand it over to you. I don't know if do you need us to work the slides for you? No? Okay. All right, take it away.
All right, so I assume everyone can see that.
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'll try to go through this quickly, but so I was asked to talk about building energy benchmarking laws, which are kind of slowly spreading around the country. In Massachusetts, I think just Boston and Cambridge have these requirements. And a lot of the larger cities around the country have them now. So, you know, basically, you know, first, what's energy benchmarking separate from legal requirements? A lot of organizations already do building energy benchmarking, you know, for example, with Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So basically, you're measuring whole building energy and water use over time to understand how your building's performing, you know, relative to itself or to a portfolio or to a similar class of buildings. And so, you know, usually use a platform like Portfolio Manager, but there are others. And you enter in building attribute data like the floor area, a level of occupancy, number of stories, et cetera, as well as the energy usage. And then the platform delivers indicators for you like energy use intensity, both site and source. Can be also greenhouse gas intensity, total energy use, energy use by fuel type, water use and water use intensity. And if you're using Portfolio Manager, you also get the Energy Star rating for your building if it's a building that they rate. So where the law comes in is basically these laws require certain building owners to annually benchmark their buildings and then report the results to the government, to the local government generally, although there are some states and county governments that have these requirements now. And then typically the data is publicly disclosed. So, you know, some reasons why communities have instituted these benchmarking requirements is, you know, the problem of building energy use being invisible. So we've discussed that with the home energy scores, as well as, you know, similar to automobiles, you can't judge the fuel economy of your automobile unless someone gives you that data. And so we have the labels that the EPA requires that goes on the car, so you can have that information when you're deciding what car to buy. So it's the same thing with buildings, where with benchmarking and public disclosure, you put that information into the marketplace. And another motivation is, and we saw this in Cambridge, that while many property owners were actively benchmarking their buildings, there are many who were not. They were just paying their bills. They were aware of their costs, but they weren't actually aware of their energy use. And there's a lot of reasons why I think that happens. Part of it is that energy costs tend not to be, for a business or a larger institution, tend not to be major costs relative to other costs like personnel costs. And so they're not high up on the priority list. And then also retrofits can be disruptive. And so a lot of organizations just don't want to go down that road. There's the split incentive problem where, if the owner is, charging rent, then they can pass all of those energy costs on to the renter. So the owner's not going to care. And there can also be issues with lack of financing and also unwillingness to take on debt to make improvements. So there are a lot of barriers to people even starting to pay attention to, I think, their energy use. So the benefit of these requirements is to put this data into the marketplace so that they inform property transactions like sales and leasing, and hopefully foster some market competition and support better consumer choice. And then, of course, by more actively managing energy use, then we can foster more energy savings, which is going to have local economic benefits, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Then from the municipality's point of view, these requirements also give municipalities energy and emissions data at the building level for planning and policy making. And over time, it also gives you important trend data. So there's this concept of building energy benchmarking laws, I think originated with the Institute for Market Transformation, which is a nonprofit in Washington, DC, that does a lot of really interesting work. And they worked with the DC government to establish the first benchmarking law in 2008. But New York was actually the first to implement there. So the first of these ordinances to go into effect was in 2010 in New York. So I looked up, IMT has a website called buildingrating.org, and they track these ordinances. So there's 33 cities as of this month. It used to be that Cambridge was the smallest city to have these ordinances, but there are a few smaller communities, and I put their populations in parentheses in the box on the bottom left. So, in Concord's population, I think it's about 17,000, right? So it's in the realm of at least Westchester, Pennsylvania, and South Portland, Maine. So the elements of the laws are, you need to establish which property types are covered, and what size thresholds. And I'll talk about Cambridge as an example when for a little further along. But you need to specify the benchmarking platform, and all of these, I believe every ordinance uses Energy Star Portfolio Manager from the EPA. And I think that's in part because it's a common platform that's being used voluntarily. It's free. It's relatively easy to use. EPA maintains it and is constantly improving it. And they also provide training regularly on its use. And of course, they do a lot of the data storage and management as well, because it all goes into the cloud. And then you need to set a reporting deadline annually when these things will come in. You need enforcement procedures. And then you need to say something about disclosing the data, the intention to disclose the data and how that might happen. And then some ordinances like Cambridge's are simply benchmarking reporting and disclosure requirements, and other communities have included performance requirements. So if you don't reach some level of energy use intensity, you have to do something to improve your performance. And so, once you have the law, then the hard part is administering it. And so the first thing you have to do with the law is you have to build a covered property database. You have to know which laws are going to be covered by it. And it's important to have a unique building ID system, because addresses can change, owners change. And so attaching a building ID number is important. And then once you know which property is going to be covered, you got to notify the owners. They're not necessarily going to know they're covered by the law. I mean, you can set up the law that's in a way to say, even if we don't notify you, you're covered by it. But obviously, it's good practice to notify the owners. You need to collect some property attributes, in part to go with the building the covered property database. So usually the assessor's data is the best for that. You need access to energy and water data, and so different utilities provide that. And you need some cooperation from those sources. You need procedures to exempt properties. I mean, there will always be situations where a property's under construction or renovation. It's not really useful to get data from that property in that year if it's not a typical year. And sometimes property data can be in error in terms of the size or the number of units. And so you have to have a way to exempt properties that you might have identified in your notification process. And once you get all the data in, you need to go through the process of making sure the data quality is good. You need to have a way to communicate with property owners and agents. So when you build these covered property databases, you're also building up the contact information. So usually assessor's data has the mailing address for the property owner, but it's extremely helpful to have email addresses and phone numbers for owners, property managers, and other agents. And then if you're doing enforcement, you have to have that procedure set up. Usually it's through, I think, administrative penalties, or ticketing. And then, a program also will have a way to disclose the data and also make the data more useful to the owners and to the public. And then a lot of program, it's almost necessary to have some form of technical assistance to support the benchmarking process by the owners. So the way just using Cambridge as an example, the way we run the program there, and I run it, I spend probably about 20% of my time, roughly, on administering the ordinance. And I have support from a consultant, which I'll talk more about. The way our ordinance works is it applies to municipal buildings or properties with 10,000 square feet or more, non-residential properties with 25,000 square feet or more the floor area, and residential properties with 50 or more units. And the ordinance applies at the parcel level in terms of, figuring out when someone has to report or not. In Cambridge, we have a lot of parcels that have multiple buildings on them. So it's the aggregate effect, like the university campuses have many buildings on individual parcels. And so, in that, for the purposes of jurisdiction, they have to add up the square footage or the number of units. So in that, in some, we have buildings that are smaller than 25,000 square feet, and residential buildings that have less than 50 units because of that. So there's about 1,100 buildings covered by our ordinance out of about 15,000 buildings in Cambridge. So it's a small percentage, but these are the larger buildings, and we estimate they account for about 70% of our energy usage in Cambridge. So, it's a situation where you're sort of minimizing the amount of effort in trying to optimize the benefit. So the way the process works every year is we build our covered property database in the fall of the year before the reporting is going to happen. So usually it's in October or November when the assessor's data is updated. And it does have to be done every year because owners change, new properties are added, occasionally buildings are demolished, and addresses can change as well. So you have to do that every year. And then we send out a written letter to property owners in December, and then also send emails to their agents, whether they're property managers or they're also third-party firms that handle this kind of reporting for some businesses. And we also post a list by address and map lot number. And then we give the owners a way to acknowledge the notification and to challenge the jurisdiction, so they can come back and say, well, my property isn't that big, or I don't have that many units, and then provide us documentation and we'll take them off the list. And then it also gives them a way to give us better contact information. So usually the owner isn't, for these larger buildings, isn't the one doing the reporting. They're going to want a property manager to do it, or a third-party agent. And then our reporting deadline is May 1st of every year. So, usually energy data becomes available in January for the preceding year. And so we're always reporting on the preceding year. So, once January comes, things are off and running. So we feel like, that's enough time for people to report. Boston picked May 15th. We, probably should have aligned our reporting deadlines, but we didn't. And then Eversource does provide, has an energy data portal, and will provide aggregated whole building data on gas and electricity for its customers. And we're talking about privacy thresholds. So their threshold is if it has more than 3 tenants and not one of them uses more than 50% of the energy, they will aggregate the data and provide it to whoever's doing the reporting and share it with the city if we ask. If it's under that, then there's an tenant authorization process. And then we also have district steam in Cambridge. The vicinity provides that. as well. So fuel oil would be the only thing where we don't have a centralized data source. So that would be on the owner to be able to get that, but that's a pretty uncommon situation these days. And then, the data is reported through Portfolio Manager, and we screen it for data quality. So we're looking for outliers in terms of the EUI. So if it has a very high EUI or very low EUI, we'll check with the reporter to find out why that is. It could be an error in the way they entered the data or something along those lines. Also, Portfolio Manager has these data quality flags that flag problems in terms of data entry that are also helpful. And then, once all the data is put into Portfolio Manager, the city sets up a reporting template. So EPA allows us to select up to 250 Portfolio Manager fields of data. And then the reporting template is set up so that it's pulling the data from the owner's Energy Star account and then creates a spreadsheet, and then that spreadsheet is forwarded to us. So we don't actually see into the reporter's Portfolio Manager account unless they give us access. Then we have a whole bunch of spreadsheets that basically is our data. We do have a consultant who provides a help desk service. So they help people with their Portfolio Manager technical issues. I think the help desk service is especially important in the first couple of years of the law being in effect. Over time, it seems that the need for it goes down, but it doesn't go down to zero. People have issues every year. There's also turnover among the property managers and so forth. You need some level of that consistently. They also do data analysis for us. They prepare the data set that we disclose. So in Cambridge, we put it on our open data platform. Anyone can go there, pull data from there. And they also, I'll show you a couple examples of data visualization and communications that they are doing for us. So the results in Cambridge are, we typically have 80 to 85% compliance by building and about 90% by floor area every year. Cambridge has not been issuing fines. I think on one hand, that's a pretty good compliance rate since we haven't really been bringing the hammer down on people. There are some administrative issues with fines, which is one reason why we haven't really gone down that path. But this is going to become more of an issue as Cambridge moves toward instituting performance requirements, which we don't currently have in the ordinance. In terms of emissions, which is what we care about, we're seeing that overall emissions are reducing about 1% per year, but we need to be reducing about 3 to 4% per year. And so obviously we're not on pace to be where we want to be. So that's why we are developing performance requirements that would be based on emissions rather than energy. And that's another discussion. Boston's doing a similar thing. We have lots of numbers. I'm not going to go over that, but one example to give you. So if you look at the number of properties covered by the ordinance by the type of property, you see that college and university academic buildings are the largest number, and then multifamily, then office, and then laboratory. But when you look at site energy usage, the order changes where laboratories become the second biggest, and then on here it's office. Sorry, laboratories become third biggest, and multifamily drops to fourth. So in terms of visualization, so we just launched it this year. So we're using the ArcGIS story map format or platform. So I'm just showing you a screenshot, but there's a URL at the bottom that you can go to if you want to see the interactive map. So on here, you can see all these circles. So each color denotes a different building type. So you can kind of figure out where Harvard and MIT are. And then the size of the circle is a relative size of the EUI. And then you can click on each circle and it gives you the pop-up box with all the individual data. So, and then you can go on this map, there are 3 tabs where you can see which properties are covered, which properties were in compliance and not in compliance, and then their performance data. And then the other thing we're doing, which we haven't quite got out the door yet, is we've developed these scorecards that we intend to send to each reporter for their properties to help them interpret the data. So basically be telling them what their energy use intensity is, and depending on how good their data is, we can give them some trend data. We give them a comparison to the local median EUI for their building type, as well as the national median. And then we can break down their fuel use by emission, by their fuel use, excuse me, and their emissions. And then on the back of the scorecard, we give them some tips on what they can do with this data in terms of how to interpret it and then move toward trying to make improvements, including connecting with our retrofit advisory program. So, and then lastly, just some thoughts. So, in terms of the pros, I guess, of these ordinances. So I think the benchmarking is relatively straightforward. With portfolio manager, it's relatively easy. I mean, it's not something that a typical, say, resident is going to do, but a property manager can typically do. And that was in part why for residential building properties, we picked 50 units as a threshold, because we felt like we were pretty confident that those properties would have professional property managers. In Boston, their threshold goes down to 35,000 or 35 units. And there are some communities, I think, that have even lower thresholds. But we're somewhat conservative when we pick those thresholds. It does give you the building level data on consumption and trends. We can usually get data at the community scale, but that doesn't help you really understand the patterns in the community, right? So this resolution of data, I think, is important. And so that enables you to prioritize which buildings need improvement and which are performing well. It gives you a basis to have conversations with stakeholders in the community. You have some data to work with and talk about. It hopefully fosters some market competition. And then most importantly, gives you the foundation for these policies and programs. So for instance, we're building our performance requirements based on this data, and it would be amended into this ordinance for implementation. So the big disadvantage of the ordinance is the administrative burden. So someone has to run the program, so you need staff. A lot of communities, I think maybe even most, are doing it in-house. So they're using their staff to do it. In Cambridge, it's a combination of part-time staff and consultants. Another small minus on this is the reliance on Energy Star, and it's only a minus in the sense that over the years, there've been various attempts to defund Energy Star or to privatize it. There's a lot of support for Energy Star in the business community, so these efforts haven't succeeded. But if someone ever did manage to knock out Energy Star, then we would have a big gap in our efforts. And then fuel oil, it's something we don't have data on, so we really have to rely on the owner to get that. But I don't think that's a big hurdle. So some thoughts are, say if Concord wants to go down this road, is some, I think, possibilities of sharing in the administrative load. And I know Lexington is interested in this idea, and I'm sure Kate's been talking to them about it. I've talked to them as well. Possibly we could find some foundation support to maybe launch a program and reduce the town's risk of a failure, I guess. And then they threw in some sunset clauses, which I'm not a big fan of, but if we were really worried that maybe the program would be too hard to do, we could say, well, we'll set a sunset date. And if it's not going well, we'll let it lapse. But if it is going well, then we can keep it going. So that was basically it.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it. Great overview. And I definitely see a lot of kind of commonalities with Home Energy Score in terms of some of the challenges, and there's overlap in terms of government programs to help support it. So I think that's interesting to me as well. And so I have some questions, but I'll let other folks jump in with questions or follow-up comments. Warren?
Yeah, I have two questions for John and one for Kate. This looks really interesting. My two questions are, do you have a sense of how much it costs a building owner or a property manager to comply with this, either in terms of money or time? And second, you've seen that the emissions have been going down 1% a year, but do you have evidence that this particular program is somehow linked to driving those emissions reductions, or would they have happened anyway? And then my question for Kate is whether you have or could get, if we were to pick the same thresholds as Cambridge, how many buildings would we be talking about?
Do you want me to go first, Kate? Yeah, so in terms of the effort, so it depends. Typically what happens with the reporting is there are some early birds who will start in, say, February, but the bulk of it happens in the 2 weeks before the deadline. So our deadline's coming up in a couple of days, and so there's a lot of activity right now. And I should have said, a lot of reporters don't meet the deadline, and so there's a process of us chasing them down after the deadline. And then we also will give extensions to property owners if they have some hardship and need some more time. So usually the reporting goes on till about July, really. In terms of the level of effort, I think it depends. So I think for most of these are larger buildings, so they tend, for the larger organizations, they have in-house property managers, and so it's just part of their job. In a lot of cases, they're already collecting and benchmarking the data anyways, so their effort is simply to report it. Although I would say, there were large organizations that I won't name that were not doing that, and as a result of the ordinance, they had to set up their systems to do it. So that was one benefit of enacting the ordinance. But my sense is I mean, it depends what the size of the portfolio is and how many property managers you're sort of allocating it amongst. But for one building, I think it's, probably less than a day of effort. With portfolio manager, you set up an account and you first put in your building, your property attributes like the size and so forth. And that data doesn't change over time. So what you have to do every year is enter the energy data. And so you have an internal source, and a lot of organizations have their own energy and utility tracking systems. And so they just use that. And then others have to go to Eversource to get their data. But once they have the data in, and then they hit the link, then it's over. So it's not a lot of effort. There are property owners have farmed out the task to third-party firms to do the reporting for them. And I haven't looked at prices in recently, but when we do provide people with a list of those kinds of firms without recommending any in particular. But as I recall, their fees can are in the range of probably $600 to $800 per property.
Thanks.
And then on the trend, I didn't mean to imply that the 1% reduction was because of the ordinance. I think it's kind of hard to tease out what's driving that. It was just simply to say that that's what's happening. And when we enacted the ordinance, we were actually going to include performance requirements. It was also at the same time that Cambridge was working on its net zero action plan. So we decided we would wait on the performance requirements to grow out of that effort. And we also basically said, well, we'll set up this benchmarking requirement and see what happens if the market takes this data and makes something happen before government steps in and requires it. So it was a way to kind of ease into requirements.
Thanks, Jim. And to answer your question, Warren, about how many businesses it would be, I just pulled up the report that our summer intern Courtney did a couple years ago, and she had recommended we look at a building ordinance, and she had in her report that we have 50 buildings that are over 10,000 square feet. But I have to check, I can check our GIS and see, if there are different thresholds we wanted to look at, we could explore how many properties that would apply to.
Thank you.
Scott?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. And John, thank you very much for that presentation. One is, I'm curious, by not enforcing this in Cambridge and, not issuing penalties, like, have you seen, or are there any concerns about attrition as building owners and property managers kind of recognize that it's not being enforced?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we passed the ordinance, we were, it was a new thing. We were worried that there would be a lot of resistance to the ordinance and people complaining. I would say over the 6 years we've administered the ordinance, that the number of people who've made a negative comment to me is, I can count on one hand. So that hasn't happened. Part of that, there was a stakeholder process when we developed the ordinance, and we went through the rationale for why we needed the ordinance. There were some businesses and the universities who supported the ordinance. I'll mention Boston Properties, which is a big commercial owner in Cambridge and Boston. They came out, testified at meetings, saying this is an important thing to do. I remember Ben Myers, the sustainability manager, saying, this world-class cities need world-class policies like this. And so, so there was a lot of support, and I think it was important to go through that process rather than, the city simply developing it and jamming it down people's throats. And so there's been a lot of buy-in. There's also a lot of process around the city's climate change goals. And so people, I think, recognize that there's a community purpose behind the ordinance. And, while they might not really want to do it, they understand the reasoning to do it. And, I haven't found so much that people, there was more resistance to the idea of disclosing the data than to requiring the reporting. Some of that was around worries about security issues, whether we would somehow divulge, sensitive industrial secrets by divulging energy use patterns. But that hasn't really come to pass. But we've seen a pretty steady, I think, compliance rate. I mean, the first year, we actually had a pretty high compliance rate, and part of it was also level of effort from the city of really going out and knocking on doors and contacting people. And we haven't been able to keep up the pace on our end, but I don't see people saying, "Oh, the city's not going to find me, so I'm not going to report." I mean, there are, I think, instances of that, but it's not a widespread problem.
Thanks, John. I know we're a little short on time, so I did have one other question. Maybe I'll just shorten the question to on the. I thought the idea of kind of sharing the administrative load with a neighboring town or towns is an interesting concept, and I guess my question would be, like, are there examples of that working with other cities or towns that have adopted this kind of an ordinance? And I'm curious more about, like, the details of how that would play out, but probably not enough time to get into that discussion here.
Well, I mean, I think, most of the cities are not near each other. South Portland and Portland, Maine are close to each other. Boston and Cambridge obviously are close, but we do it separately. And there's a cluster in Minnesota. I don't know actually what they're doing in Minnesota, so that might be worth looking into. But what I was thinking of sharing the load is, say, Concord and Lexington did this and wanted to have a consultant. I think there would be a way to share a consultant rate, which might have some cost-saving benefits.
Thanks so much, John. I know we're running low on time. I just have one comment and then one kind of hopefully quick question. The comment is, I think I was thinking about, this challenge of collecting utility data, and, I find it interesting that you can, through various apps on your phone today, link all of your financial accounts and sign off and get access to all of your financial data in one place and analyze it and determine, am I budgeting right, et cetera. There's all these value to doing that, but we can't do the same thing for utility data. So it's like something to think about. Why is that so hard? And will we ever break through that there's more visibility to it, both from a property manager and from community and homeowner, et cetera. And then I think just to build on Warren's point, I think it is important to try and understand, like, what are we helping to drive? So with these ordinances, are you able to get more buildings that are now that they're benchmarking and they're seeing their performance compared, are they actually, like, are they pursuing Energy Star? Are they improving over time? And so I think that's, I'm not sure I see that. And so it's interesting. I think that's important for us to figure out, like, how would you tell that story? What's this actually going to do given the amount of effort? I think it could have an impact, but without being able to quantify it in some way, even if you can't quantify it down to the emissions level, I think it's harder to sell, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, my quick response would be, I don't think benchmarking requirements on their own are going to drive the improvements we need. And so that's why you're seeing more communities moving toward, but I think we could think about staging the requirements, right? So that people get used to the idea of doing the benchmarking and then have some advanced warning that they're going to be performance requirements.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. So I think now we just have 5 minutes or so left. I want to open up back up for public commentary, public questions before we vote to close the meeting. So I'm looking for hands. Pam, it looks like you have your hand up. Pamela?
Thank you. Would there be some way that homeowners could voluntarily get involved in this? And also, for example, I live in Concord Green. All of the gas usage is rolled into the condo fee. So there is zero incentive to conserve gas here. And this is terrible. We can't even measure what we do. There is no ability to replace your furnace with a high efficiency gas furnace, much less a heat pump. If I were to replace my furnace with a heat pump, which is what I would like to do, I would still have to pay for the gas usage of the entire community. This is just, could we at least, I wish there were a benchmarking that could include communities, condo communities like Concord Green in it.
Well, I think
Right,
that would be the question for Concord, for us and for the town to consider, is Concord Green a good fit for this type of whatever benchmarking ordinance, whatever you want to call it? And I think you're illustrating the split incentives that John mentioned, right? That the landlord doesn't, the property owner doesn't pay those costs. And so they don't have the incentive to support the efficiency measures. So no,
And also you can't manage what you don't measure. So this is at least such a good idea, because then we'd have the data of what the energy situation actually is, instead of saying, oh, well, we can build new all electric construction cheaper and better. We would have the data about it.
Yeah, the Cambridge ordinance does apply to condo complexes.
Yeah.
There are some separate administrative challenges with condos, but it does apply.
Is the data public?
Yeah.
Can you go look up the?
Yep. So you can look at those maps I showed.
Or like
And
Emerson
you can actually pull the data off our open data platform if you like to play with spreadsheets.
any last questions?
Could we do it here?
It's a matter of money and staff, I think, and political will.
Yeah. All right. We are just about out of time, so I would entertain a motion to
Oh, one
adjourn.
last question, please.
Yes, Pamela.
I looked on the agenda, and it says that that we could get the packet a day in advance. But
That's my mistake, Pamela. I forgot to put it up yesterday. I'm sorry. I will put that up now, so it's there.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's, I'm jealous of packets that,
All right, thanks, Pamela. Thanks, everyone, for your time. If I can just get the motion to adjourn, we will go ahead and adjourn. I appreciate, John, your time, and Kate, all of your work on Article 31. Who wants to make the motion? We actually have to do this. Thank you, Courtney. Who wants to second it?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor of adjourning? All right, thank you all.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
You.
Bye.